trade risks flaring up yet again, our next guest says the Philippines should start with economic policy reform amid the changing global context. With us now for more is Sonny Africa, the Executive Director of IBON Foundation. Good to have you on, Sonny. Welcome to the program.
Morning, Kathy. Thanks for the invitation. Hello, everyone.
So, what do you now mean by changing global context following the U.S. legal interventions and now the escalation of that word war between the U.S. and China? And how should the Philippines roll along with it?
Uh, I think people are underestimating what's happening with global economic policy. A lot of the narrative talks about Trump being the great disruptor, but actually, if you talk about U.S. economic policy, since the Biden administration, they've been rolling back from multilateralism since 2008. Since the Obama administration. They've been rolling back from multilateralism, sabotaging the WTO, and since 2008, 2009, they've actually been increasing their protectionist measures. So it's not just a Trump thing. It has actually been building up in the US for the last, well, basically four administrations now. And I think that is shaking things up. We're seeing a more siloed world, a more compartmentalized world. And the Philippines still, clings on to this vain hope that just simply opening up the foreign investment in foreign goods will be what will work for us. We just say the US sees that opening up the foreign investment in foreign goods hasn't worked for them. If the world's biggest economic power doesn't think that helps them, it seems weird that the Philippines thinks that that same sort of old school free market thinking is what we need. So we really need some sort of a resetting, I think, of our economic policies.
So, given that global trade frictions are now aggravating our manufacturing position, let's say if we open up our economy now, how will we do, our exporters and our local producers?
Opening up has been really bad for us. It's very odd for us in Ibon that people, well, mainstream economists don't seem to realize opening up the Philippine economy for the last basically 45, 50 years has caused agriculture to fall to its smallest share in the country's history and manufacturing to its smallest in 75 years. We're actually a laggard even in ASEAN. I think we have the third or maybe at best the fourth smallest manufacturing sector. So I think the bottom line is it's very alarming for us to hear that the trade delegation to the United States was actually going to counteroffer with the Trump administration to further open us up with zero tariffs and to give even non-trade benefits to the United States because that's not going to work. Opening up has advantages, but if we've left domestic producers alone and not given them the support, we won't be in a position to take advantage of that opening up. And I think one thing that we should have to correct is this half century of one-sidedness. If that's not fixed, if we still think that merely opening up will make the Philippines competitive, it has actually failed for the last 50 years. All the symptoms are there: informality, unemployment, worsening poverty, collapsing industry. I think all the signs are there that we need that pretty drastic reset of our economic
I
policies.
wanted to put that into context and visualize for the audience. The historical data that you mentioned some 50 years back, I mean, if you could just pull that up, because Philippine tariffs have plunged from a nominal average of about 41.4% in the 1980s to just
Uh,
6% today. So if you take a look at that, manufacturing should have improved by double digits. It's an inverse correlation, shouldn't have been for over 75 years, and now we're seeing agriculture even to its smallest in our history. What do these trends tell
um,
us?
Well, that's exactly the problem. There could be advantages from opening up the economy, but the government should have ensured that the domestic producers, meaning domestic manufacturing and farmers, were strong enough to compete and even export. And I think the biggest failing is that a lot of free market economists think that the competitive impulse is enough to drive more productive agriculture industry. That is not the case. In every episode of industrial development to agricultural development, every country went through a phase of substantial government support. So the biggest problem is that in the Philippines, there's this weird notion that just opening up, in a sort of Manny Pacquiao way, just opening up and making people compete with foreign producers would be enough to sort of toughen them up and make them, overcome any competitive advantage other countries might have, without realizing other companies have a competitive advantage because their governments supported them either historically or currently. So opening up the country without any sort of compensatory support for Filipino farmers, for Filipino industry. That just means that what has happened exactly, agriculture will keep falling and Philippine industry will keep falling. In a lot of ways, even our Philippine manufacturing, that's a bit disguised. The decline is disguised by the fact that, by our estimate, anywhere from 60 to 70% of what's reported as Philippine manufacturing is not actually Filipino to begin with. These are like locators in export zones, and we can't claim to be producing Intel's or Texas Instruments semiconductors. I mean, we're made an address, they get our subsidies, get our sort of, our tax breaks, fiscal support, but we're not actually producing those chips. We're not actually benefiting from that technology. And most importantly, we're not actually building the foundations of a modern Philippine economy.
Okay, so it's clear that that one-two punch isn't going to benefit us, Sonny. So how do we flip the narrative? Those negotiations are ongoing as we
Yeah.
speak. How can they make the change and make it happen for our benefit?
I think it has to start with the Philippine government has to rethink its economic policy making. If it remains trapped in this, textbook notion that just opening up is a good thing, the numbers are there, the actual experience is there. That hasn't worked for the Philippines. Now, with that insight and appreciation of the problem, that means resetting our economic policy to actually protect the domestic economy, exactly like the US is doing. And I know people are going to be saying, oh, but the Philippines is so small. How can we negotiate with the United States? Well, we're not actually that small. We're about the 12th, 13th largest population in the world. Also, we do have potentially ASEAN to work with to negotiate with the United States. The US is the biggest investor in ASEAN. A lot of their semiconductor supply chains are in ASEAN. I think if the Philippines on its own would have a hard time negotiating with the US, if the Philippines leverages ASEAN in some way to negotiate with the US collectively, I think that is a way forward. But of course, the problem there is that we do know how the Philippine foreign policy works vis-a-vis the US. I think, too many of our ASEAN neighbors are a bit more practical with how they deal with the US,
Okay.
China geopolitical rift. We've unfortunately all our chips are on one side, and I think that is a big stumbling block as well.
But it's good that you cite there the leverage that we do have. Thank you so much, Sunny Africa. I do appreciate your insights there of IBON Foundation.